Thank you, Celebration. Really like cool songs, right? Like we're in favor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. So we're talking about transformation. You know, if you're confused, unsure, you're in the right place for transformation, right? Here's the deal. We're born and we die. Nobody's getting out of here without that, right? We're clear on that. Good. And then everything is change. Everything is change. And yet we spend so much of our time in resistance to change. We would rather hold on to the past. Even if we weren't thriving, we weren't happy, even if we're in pain and it no longer serves us, we'll hold on to that. Even if we're just marking time. No highs, no lows, day in, day out. We would rather hold on to mediocre existence than to deal with the confusion and uncertainty of change, even if that change means something amazing. Why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we do that as human beings? Why do we hold on to something that isn't for our highest good? Well, because we know what it is. We're pretty comfortable. We like knowing what to expect. We've learned how to cope with the pain. And you know what? That's how I lived my first 30 years on this planet. First 30 years. And I thought it might be helpful for you to get a snippet of my life and who I am and where I come from and how I used to deal with change in the past. You see, at that time, my badge of honor was that I was a strong survivor. Survivor of trauma. Survivor of recreated trauma. I was an Olympic medalist in pain endurance. I used to say pain was my greatest motivator. I'm grateful I don't have to live like that anymore, right? And I used to think other people had these charmed lives, but I had no idea what their walk or their journey was. And it's from our own life experiences that we make these judgments about others. We often think, oh, the grass is greener over there. And we react to their words and their actions based on our own preconceived beliefs, preconceived ideas. So here I am working as your minister, and so my question to you is, what preconceived ideas do you have of me? Because I know you have them. Who do you say I am? Do you say that I am the angry black woman? Do you see me as less of a leader based on my gender or based on my race? So let me answer a couple of those questions for you. Societally, we have been conditioned to see an individuated black woman or a woman of color as angry. And any woman in power is taking liberties beyond her station. That's our society. That's what we live in. So don't think you didn't come in here with those already in your mind or in your belief system. Of course you did. How could you not? How could I not? Am I an angry person? No, I don't think I am. Can I get angry? Oh, baby, yes. Oh, yes, I can. Do I label myself as African American? I do not. Couple of reasons. I wasn't born here. Second is I'm multiracial. Multiracial means that, yes, I have African genes, but I also have Carib Indian, East Indian, British, English, and Scottish. I'm a lovely mutt. And I love it. My father's mother was a white English woman who created a huge scandal by living with my grandfather. And they couldn't get married because that was not done in that society. This is a picture of my grandmother, which is my mom's mother. That's about 8 years before my grandmother transitioned, and we're coming up to a year almost of my mom passing. My parents were immigrants, and I was the oldest child of 2. And we came from London, England. And I think it's around somewhere between 6 and 8, so I'll just say 7. That'll be easy. And we come from a matriarchal line with mixed messages of women being subservient to men. So you can understand that was pretty confusing. And as many of you know, my first religion was Catholicism, or maybe I should say Catholicism. And early in my adult life, I used to say that I was a recovering Catholic because the God that I learned about was all-powerful and vengeful. And the doctrines of the Catholic Church supported me in my belief that I was a sinner and unworthy. So, of course, I became very fearful of God. That's me at 17. I didn't even know I was cute back then, okay? It's amazing. You know, when you look back at your pictures, you're like, oh, wow. That's what happened there. And my early adult life was really filled with a lot of upheavals, and I had several crises of faith. And my relationship with God back then, non-existent. I was furious with God. I felt that He was punishing me unmercifully and without cause. And in my journey, I came into the awareness that I was damaged in my childhood. And my adult patterns of being in relationship with others was my attempt to fix my childhood. Do you hear me? How many times do we go about doing that very same thing until we get awakened in clarity? And I was really comfortable continuing those painful patterns because that's how it was. That's how life is supposed to be. Robert Brummett, in his book, Finding Yourself in Transition, using life's changes for spiritual awakening. And this is the book that we will be looking at in the workshop, in the spirit groups in the next 2 weeks. He writes about our resistance to change. We often fear and resist change. Our resistance is often subtle and unconscious. There is a part of us that stubbornly clings to the old and the familiar. There is something within us that unconsciously resists these very changes that we consciously desire. The greatest of all human fears is fear of the unknown, and change, especially deep or sudden change, almost always confronts us with the unknown. So for me, eventually in therapy, I learned about family systems and breaking the cycle of dysfunction. And I also learned how to make better choices in my relationships, as well as individuating and owning myself. Yet there was still something missing, that spiritual connection, because our soul yearns for that connection. And then eventually in the 80s, I found unity. And that's a picture of the Lincoln Center. The building to the right is Avery Fisher Hall. And in Avery Fisher Hall, that is where Eric Butterworth had his Sunday messages. And there were thousands of us there listening. And for me, that was really where my transformation started. My spiritual life became richer. I transcended religious dogma. My life started to shift and flourish. I was in the possibilities, the what ifs, can't wait to see what's coming. And then I remember thinking, wow, people should really know about this kind of God. This is a really cool God. I should be able to share that with others. And then I quickly dismissed that that's not going to be me who does it. You see, I felt sure that it had to be someone who was pious and worthy enough to do this work. And then I was in New York. My career took off. I got really busy. And after years of that career, I came to a crashing end of a business venture, which felt like the end of my life. That business was my baby, and it was a tea shop, because, British tea, that's what we do. And it was just everything that I wanted it to be, and we were in a recession. When you're in a recession, people don't think about going out for tea, do they? So that was the end. Brummett writes this: "Indeed, every change is a type of death, a death to an old way of living or being. Yet, ironically, change, a dying to the old, is one of the defining characteristics of growth. Yet we fear death. And this very fear of death, the fear of change, is also our fear of life itself. To be fully alive, we must be willing to be changed, to surrender into the moment without resistance. We must be willing to die daily. Die daily." Unknowingly, simply because it was the end of a business, I entered into this process of transition. And endings is the first stage of being in transition. And here's the tricky part. When we are in that place of loss, we cannot spiritually bypass our emotions, those emotions of sadness, of grief, of loss. If we don't do our work, here's the consequences. We simply carry the unfinished business of the past into the future. Most of us do not handle endings very well. We haven't been trained to do that in our society. And as a result of our denial, many of us carry a reservoir of grief. Can you imagine carrying a reservoir of grief from previous losses in our life? Each ending may trigger this unresolved grief from the past as well as from the current loss. So let's look at this from a different perspective, right? Here at UCOH, you've been in transition from the moment Steve said, "It's time for me to retire." After 10 years of loving service, you probably went, "Oh!" Right? I heard we did. Yeah, that's the first push because of that ending, and that's a major piece to this community. Because of that ending, it pushes you now into transition. And when you go into that process, yours is to do the work of grieving, of feeling of the loss that comes up. And then quickly what happened then is a couple of years later, the Grandins left, right? And if we didn't give ourselves permission to do that first set of work, the feeling the grief, through Reverend Steve's leaving, then we've got the Grandins on top of that. Guess what's happening? We've got compounded grief. And compounded grief, my friends, it takes a lot of work. It takes a longer process to work through compounded grief. And during our time of loss, we're going to feel a lot of different things. One of them is called disenchantment. And disenchantment comes when the thing or the person we have trusted or based our love on disappears, is no longer there. It may feel like the bottom has dropped out. Like when you discover your minister's about to retire. Or after we open our hearts to new ministers, and then they are suddenly gone, we can feel both disappointment that their abrupt leaving didn't meet our expectations, as well as disenchantment. And then there could be this sense of disorientation and a level of disengagement because of the complexity of the loss. And we've seen that. We've seen people who have just checked out, who have left. It's just a lot. It's a lot of emotions if we don't deal with them in a healthy way. And after major endings, it can challenge our beliefs of how we think things should be and what they should look like. And then we enter into the next stage of transition, which is called the void. V-O-I-D, the void. And this stage is one filled with confusion and chaos. And we don't like that, because nothing seems to make sense. And sometimes it feels like we're walking in quicksand, and the day-to-day is just kind of blasé. And sometimes this sense of loss can trigger what's known as the dark night of the soul. Have you heard of that before, the dark night of the soul? Yeah. And the dark night of the soul, we question our own reality. We question God. Does God even exist? We question our connection to anything higher than ourselves. We find it hard to focus or remember things. And maybe for a time we wish we could just step off the planet for a little bit. Ever felt that? Yeah? Those of you who are sitting that the sun is just blazing down, please move. Don't sit there and just be blinded. Please move. Be comfortable. This is your home. This is your home. You're not going to disturb me. It takes a lot more than that. But this time of emptiness and uncertainty, my friends, is vital. It's necessary. It's necessary. The universe needs this void to create form, to bring things new into existence. This is a sacred time of fallowness that is necessary for revitalization. It's in this not knowing, it's in the confusion, it's in the disarray that spirit comes in and has its way with us. Did you hear that? So in my situation, after my business closed, I was kind of in that place of confusion. I'm like, what? What am I doing? I thought this was it. This is what I was going to retire from. No. And I heard the nudge. I heard the nudge. When are you going to do what is yours to do? When are you going to allow yourself to become what you are meant to be? And I heard it loud and clear. Even though that it was a low time in my life, I did believe that my soul needed to be the catalyst for whatever I did next. Brummett says this: we are each being called to go beyond ourselves as we know, as we now exist. Step by step, day by day, the plan unfolds before our very eyes. The path we must take is the path we are on. Once I realized and accepted that being a minister was my purpose here, I gotta tell you, miracles like I can't believe happened that just got me into seminary really fast. Got us relocated from Florida to Kansas City, all expenses paid by a company that Graham just started working at 10 miles away from seminary. I mean, it was like those kind of things that you can't even plan for, just amazing. So I started my talk off with asking, who do you say I am? Who do you think I am? And so I'm going to refer to this verse from the New Testament, Mark chapter 8, verses 29 and 30. And Jesus is hanging around talking to one of his disciples, or actually it was a group of his disciples. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. And then Jesus sternly says, not to tell anyone about him. Now, I've always found this verse to be very confusing. So you know what? I went for help. The Bible commentary suggests two reasons why Jesus is asking the question. The first one is to discern whether the disciples had a clear understanding of who he was. Others suggest that it was to challenge their concept of their belief of what a Messiah would do and look like. But then Jesus quickly says, don't tell anyone. Why would he say that? Now, some theologians say that it was to avoid those who would crown him king, while others suggest it was to avoid those who would destroy him. And now we're going to take a look deeper, metaphysically. We know that the term Jesus refers to the divine perfection of man. The divine perfection of man. And we're talking about the species, not guys, right? Okay. And Messiah means the visible manifestation of the Christ. The visible manifestation of the Christ. So from that verse, we can see that the question and answer is about the perfection of the indwelling Christ within us. The indwelling Christ within us. But then I'm like, well, why shouldn't we shout that? Why shouldn't we be talking about that? Why shouldn't we be telling everyone? And I think it's because our ego, our mind likes to have the answer. It loves to be right. It loves to know. And then it feels empowered and confident. It's got the answer. Starts strutting around. I got this. I know everything. I'm enlightened now. Oh, I don't think so, right? So when we allow our mind, our personality to think we have it all figured out, we lose the ability to shift, to grow, and transform. So living in uncertainty is about living in the possibility, the probability, and the mystery. It allows us to bring clarity, wonder, heightened awareness to our experience. Who am I? Who do I say I am? It's to question our beliefs. It's to question how we think the world operates. And this state can feel uncomfortable, but the richness from it is just amazing. So when asked who I am, I could say, well, I'm the minister here at Unity Church of the Hills. But I choose to live in the question. I choose to live in the question and ask myself the question of, well, what does the minister of Unity Church of the Hills mean? What does it look like? What do I do? How do I engage? What does authenticity mean? What does transparency mean? And what does being in transition with you all mean as well? So I'm hoping that you come to the understanding that we as a spiritual community are in the midst of transition. That's where we're at. And we're at a time of recreation. And you also can be in the question of, what do you think a minister should be? How should they be operating with you? Why do you attend Unity Church of the Hills? Are you here to socialize? Are you here to be inspired? Are you here to be entertained? Are you here to shift consciousness? Are you here for great change and transformation? Those are your questions. So this week, when you are in meditation, I'm inviting you to be in the question. To be in the question of what is yours to do in this community. How do you want to show up? How do you want the community to feel around you? Because that's how Spirit comes in and starts revitalizing and creating. Namaste.